Hey, good morning, folks. It's Sunday again, and here we are. Welcome back to the channel and the Sunday stream. And let me silence my phone because evidently I can't even manage the most basic of online etiquette. Um, all right, so there we go. All right, so things things to talk about today. So the topic of today's stream. Um, Basically, what do we as DMs, GMs, judges, whatever you want to call yourself, what should we be doing? Not necessarily what do we need to be doing, but what is good for us to do to help our players get into the game. And uh, let me just kind of start and get this out of the way up front. We're not talking about what's the bare minimum. Everybody's got a bare minimum. Let's put aside, I don't need anything. I can play anything because I think it's a fair assumption that a lot of gamers can just jump in and play if they need to. Uh, let's also put aside um, the I can make anything work discussion because none of those are really useful to this topic, I think. So not trying to shut anybody down, but I mean, for the sake of streamlining the talk, and I don't know where this weird ass shadow on my face came from over here, there, um, but uh, yeah, I think it's fair to assume that all of those particular touch points really don't do much for the discussion. So I'm just going to kind of say up front, let's kind of stay away from those. What we're looking at though is tips and tricks specifically that do help in getting players in. Um, and the things that we should avoid in that might create impediments to a streamlined entry into game. And so with that, I'm going to say good morning to the folks who have shown up. We got Manfred, welcome. I'm not sure if he's still here, but he was here at 3:27 p.m. And so I am assuming he was here yesterday. And then we have Cody. Good morning, sir. RPG Dad, welcome. Saxius, you have made it, sir. And Darth, don't worry, Darth Elf will probably disappear. I don't know. I guess I kind of have this weird Malekithia curse thing going on without the glowy eye. So I guess Dark Elf, um, all right. So to begin with, I guess what we see a lot of times when people are trying to get people into gaming, into a new campaign, is most campaigns that I have ever played, and understand, my experience is my experience. I am very much on record as saying I haven't played with a bunch of strangers. I haven't. I've usually played with friends and the like, or people that I know pretty well as just acquaintances. But most campaigns I have run have started with sort of an elevator pitch. I want to run a campaign. It's all about Vikings trying to reclaim their land. The players, my idea was for all the players to be members of the ruling household and various loyal retainers who managed to escape. And the campaign will be framed out with them going around gaining power, gaining assets, gaining allies that they can eventually come back and take their home. Now, that's an actual campaign I want to run, but that's the pitch. And for a lot of players, that's all they're going to need. They're like, awesome. What system? What level? What class restrictions? And if you're fortunate enough to have a player who asks those questions, excellent. You then have to remember those answers for each other player who answers, or for those players who don't answer, because the last thing you want is for somebody to come to the table and not have made a character class because they thought a character of a particular race or class because they thought they were banned, only to find one of them at the table. It's kind of a shitty look. So Yes, you can definitely run campaigns like that, and most of my gaming life has been that way. Um, because the other part of that equation is that those players who I pitch this to, if they don't immediately have an idea, will communicate with me over time. I'll get, back in the day, it was sitting around the lunch table or out on recess because, I've been playing that long, or, you know, at the break room at work or online, or when we're getting together on board game night between, RPG nights, um, that sort of a thing, at the kids' birthday party when all the other kids are running around playing, me and the dads or, and the moms are off, whoever's in my game talking about the game. Um, so yeah, I mean that can happen. You can have a very organic entry into a campaign, and I think in a lot of ways that's kind of the ideal. But I feel that especially nowadays, where we are playing more online and more often with strangers, and kind of dovetailing into last week's topic of being an adult gamer, in a stranger in a strange place in a strange land. um you don't have that socialization with your players that you might have had in the past. And so it makes it a little more difficult to have those organic conversations. I myself have no problem spewing information out onto social media, onto Discord, onto Facebook, and all that. What I don't get a lot of is a lot of similar communication back up this upstream. On my Discord, for example, I have a hosted games channel on there where I have been talking about my plans to run various games. I don't get a lot of feedback or communication on that. So that organic conversation, that organic lead into campaigns doesn't really exist anymore. More often now, we are finding players for a particular game system and then laying out in one place some sort of a player primer or at least a campaign outline. Um, and that's sort of more what we're going to look at today, I hope. All right, so it looks like we have John, the old geek, is here. RW Bishop, Grumpy Old Slan, Cal is here. Cool. We were up to seven. We were up to eight. We're up to seven now. So let's see. I lost my train of thought. Oh, so bad. Anyways, so I will also say if you have ideas or thoughts on the topic, by all means, throw them up in the comments. I will star them and get to them as I can. I have posted the link to the chat if you would like to, or to the stream if you'd like to come on and join me. It's at the top of the comments, so you might have to actually scroll back up. And I guess let's start with what is too little, or the bare minimum. So I think anything anything less than bullet points, touch points on the key setting, um, whether that's a game world, or a specific story, uh, plot angle, um, and then what character classes and races, if you're doing a D&D type game, obviously, you want to allow. If you're doing a point based system, you want to always, of course, include um, the points that you're going to be using for construction, unless it's a game like Star Wars D6 where you have a set number of points. um, if you're going to allow or disallow various optional elements like perks and flaws or feats or something like that, it's good to mention that. um, I think it's also very good to communicate upfront that every character is up for review, because you can't list, there's no way you could possibly list every possible combination that a player can come up with. And there's some things that just show up as being really bent, broken, and wrong, when they come to the table. I think it's also important to set forward the mood for your game. Um, you don't want to have a go for a serious tone and have somebody come in with Kazoo the bard, and who's yucking it up the whole game. Um, that's just not going to happen. Um, so, but um, that said, I think there's always a fair assumption that mood can bleed through. I mean, serious stories can have funny characters. We know that it's a thing. So I mean, try to be open minded. I think the other thing too is be open minded when you're setting up game sessions. I've talked many times about the various times where I have had a hard line set against something, and then somebody comes to my table who's either new and really excited about something, and I want to make sure I engage them on that. And so I allow something to come in and it ends up being a win. Or sometimes people have those really good characters that are a decent exception. A lot of people want to play exceptional characters. Like, I want to play a dark elf who's good and is on the land, which was an awesome idea when it first came out. But now everybody wants to play a dark elf who's good and is out on the land, and da da da. So be open-minded, I guess, is another thing. So I'm ventured into ramble territory. Surprise, everybody drink. But absolutely, it needs to be two-way consistent. The you have to Players have to communicate their desires and their needs and their wishes. The GM needs to communicate to the players his desires, needs, and wishes for the game, because he is a player, and I will stand on that hill, wave a flag, die on it, and become a legend there. The GM is a player. It's just straight up, it's a thing. This is a topic for another stream. There's I mean, but in this context, I mean, you definitely want to make sure that if you're dealing with a game that is super broad like GURPS, that you're very specific, you're very much vocal on what source books you're allowing, what kind of abilities you're using. I am not a GURPS guy. I'm on record as actually kind of hating GURPS, but that's just me. I have a friend who's all about the GURPS, but I have bought GURPS books. But so I kind of know what they look like and what the system is seriously. It GURP. If GURPS is your thing, by all means. But it's just I don't like it. It's too generic for me. So let's see. I wanted to share something today, and I should have had this primed up. And this is me being a bad host, but bear with a moment while I track down something, because I want to show you the absolute worst thing I ever did for a game, if I can find it. And I'm probably not going to be able to now. Damn it. Anyways, I once wrote a primer for a campaign that ended up becoming effectively a source book. By the time I stopped and realized my madness, I was at 46 pages. 46 pages with art, layout. It was cool, but what started out as a campaign primer ended up becoming an experiment to see if I could make an actual source book, and if I could make a supplement that looked like the new 5e formats. It's really back when 5e first came out, and that was just nuts. So yeah, I went crazy on that one. Unfortunately, I can't find it, but so yes, that went too far. Morning Full Metal Dragon. um, that said, it had everything that everybody needed, and if somebody was willing to read that book, and I call it a book because 46 pages, um, booklet, um, it would have given them everything they needed to know. I had the history of the. It was a human focused Renaissance tech campaign where that took place in an empire of man that had come in and conquered half of a continent. Um, and so I had their history. I had all of the states that were there. I had their religion. I had four religions actually because there was four major human religions on the continent. So I had four different pantheons. I had all of that. Um, I had bits of, I had, discussions on how magic was looked at and treated in the game. Um, it was it was detailed. I had a language tree that talked about how, if you spoke this language, it was related to these languages, so you could understand them. Maybe, it was pretty cool. It was very detailed. Especially, and the reason I put a lot of detail into it is and this kind of goes maybe into some of the preparing your campaign. It was a humanicentric campaign, and so a lot of players are often going to balk at playing D&D, but playing just people. And I wanted to add in enough detail and spice to where playing people, playing humans, was interesting. So I focused on detailing a lot of the cultures. The Latresans were um, this island folk who were sort of like the French. Now, all these people are from the same base culture that originally migrated there, but then you had like um, the Cartosans who were very much like Sicilian pirate type characters, and so you had all these different cultures that stood out. So that was an example of an extremely detailed um, Grumpy Old Slant. I would call it a chat book, except for it was full page, 8.5 by 11 pages. Like done in the same style as a fifth edition book, background coloring and everything. It's pretty cool. I blame my brother for showing me this really cool tool at the time that was an auto formatted system for making 5e style books, um, um, which was really useful and I loved it. Can't remember the name of it now, so don't ask. I have to find out again. Um, 46 pages isn't madness, but it's probably more than you're going to get your players to really want to take a look at. Now, if I was to flip that on its head, my most recent campaign for 5e that I've been running for almost 3 years now, not 3 years constantly, there's been a lot big gaps and a lot of delays and stuff like that, but 3 years. I mean, they're only pushing 9th level after 3 years of play. That started out with me, giving the basic idea. You guys are all going to start at 0 level as citizens of basically kids, young adults who grew up in the same village. And then I had each of them fill out a little questionnaire that at the same time told me about their character and helped them build their character, but also helped build the village. Like, one of the questions was, what is a dark and spooky legend that you've heard about the town? Another one was, describe a positive event that occurred between your character and the village. And another one was, describe a negative event that occurred between your character and the village. And I took all of these and then I built a village. That was really fun and that was really good, but it was really simple too, because each player only had to make their character and then they had to fill out the sheet, and then I ran with it from there. And we've been playing in that for years now, and the players are very much attached to the village. the village is currently in jeopardy and they're on this big ass quest that's way above their head, and so they're really grasping and coming up with interesting strategies and plots of their own to find ways to save their village. um, and it's been good. The other one, the human centric one, I've never played. I have all that work put in and I've never run it. I've talked to people about it. I've had some people go, that sounds cool, but I've never been able to get anybody to play it. um, so yeah, there's that. Let's see, I'm going to throw this out here again just in case. But so, well, yeah, I mean, I would say Harn is extremely detailed, but at the same time, a lot of campaign settings are. I mean, if you look at original Forgotten Realms, there's a lot of work done for that. Um, but original Forgotten Realms was not overdone to the point that modern Forgotten Realms is. Original Forgotten Realms had was very much, it was like Greyhawk plus. Greyhawk is always famous as being full enough to give you an idea what's going on, but empty enough to allow you to do anything you want. Forgotten Realms also had that, but it gave you a little bit more to specific seeds that you can work with. Greyhawk was very much a generic world, whereas Forgotten Realms was a pretty open and generic world with some good story hooks and lore to go with it. Modern Forgotten Realms, vis-a-vis the Sword Coast, is kind of overstuffed and overplayed. Harn is definitely um, super detailed, but Harn also has the benefit of having consistent development for the same game world since it was created. It's never been redone. It's never been lost to obscurity. It's, I mean, it's had other additions and stuff like that, but the world has always been the same. So Harn is definitely detailed. Harn is also excellent for ripping off for your other games. So um, I used to grab their stuff when I was a kid just because their castle maps and stuff are cool. Not to mention their cover art was always amazing to me because it was essentially looking at like historical. It's the same kind of artwork you'd find picking up, say, like an Osprey book. If you're not familiar with Osprey, Osprey is a book that's famous, a company that's famous for doing uniform books, and really accessible historical books but focusing on soldiers and stuff. They have now ventured into doing game books, which is awesome. If you are a role player or and allow me to plug a company here real quick. If you're a role player and or a miniatures gamer, take a look at Osprey. Cody and I were looking at Osprey's catalog the other day and going, what the hell? When did all this come out? And that's because Osprey pumps stuff out, not in a crappy, like, like just churn. They see what Osprey's strength seems to be is they seem to be really open to submitted manuscripts from from outside, and so you will see games come in that are perhaps for the same genre, and maybe even the same game type, but they'll publish them. But yeah, they have a lot. They have in-house artists that they can work with already, so they really have turned that into a gaming company. So it's a game company worth checking out. Anyways, back to the point. So turning away for a moment from what statistical, factual, mechanical stuff that you need to lay out for your players, want to look at and talk about what you need to build world-wise. And the reason I bring this up is because there is a lot that you can do with your campaign world that is too much. And yeah, I mean, you can build a world that is way too big. You can build a world that is not big enough. You can build a world that is far too detailed. You can build a world that is not detailed enough. Um, I am famously bad at overbuilding worlds. Um, I love drawing maps. Now that I have digital tools, I am really fond of just drawing a map for the sake of map. Um, and so, yeah, there are lots of um, sorry, brain not working this morning. um, I've been known to build maps that are just woefully full. At the same time, I've also drawn maps that are really full of things, but don't have anything in them to really draw the player out. um, and I think that's important when you're making a map and you're setting up your setting. You want to make sure that you have things for players to go after. um, it's important that you have stuff to show people. It's important that you have. Oh, sorry, my brain is just not firing. I really apologize, guys. um, you want to make sure that your map has ideas to pull people in, whether that's just names or places. Uh, it's important to have stuff to draw the players out. This is a map that I've recently done, um, and uh, this is for a possible campaign that I'd like to run. I also realized that as I was building this, that almost all of my maps start on the east coast of something. Um, I don't know, it's just how my brain works, which is kind of funny because I'm a West Coast guy. You'd think that I would draw maps starting with the West Coast, but I tend to not map them that way. But if we go into this map, you'll see that there are things on this map that you would expect to see on a map. We've got we've got a capital, we've got towns, we've got villages, we've got topography, obviously. Morning, BK Dan, uh, and Daniel Kearney. Thank you. Um, we've got some interesting names. I mean, we've got the Elfwood. I mean, while it sounds really generic, I put that there because I figured that's kind of just how the humans would in the area would refer to it. It's got its own name in parentheses. Um, we've got other locations that are very much named for things that are there, but which should attract players. Players are going to look in there and be like, "Oh, the Druid home forest. There must be Druids there." Yes, obviously. Grimstone Mountains. This is a small little mountain range that pops up in the middle of this forest. Um, so, it's a place to put dungeons. It's a place to put adventures. And to have things happen at. We've got a human culture that spans up and down these two rivers to the sea and then across the sea. We see a human culture here that has gone a bit to the south of this main territory and seems to have ventured out to where there's a village over here by the Green Hills, but not much further. Um, we also have like the Tower Majeur. Now, none of these things have to um, have any kind of definition when you first create it, but I think creating a setting where there is definitely enough places for people to go and for you to place adventures and enough empty space to place adventures. The Tellenwood is a big old expansive forest. There's a lot of stuff that could happen there. The Elfwood is a big old expansive forest. Now I have a detail map of this somewhere, which for my DM's eyes only, or for later on in the game, that shows where the elven settlements are. But as far as the people know, and the people are concerned, the only real thing that they know of is the elven town that's in the middle of it, because that's the only like large elf settlement that's there that they would probably know. Um, because they probably aren't in this setting. They're not dealing with elves all the time. You see the map scale is pretty good. It's only a 10-mile hex. So it's a very localized map. You know, it's like what, 70 miles across. Um, let's see. And so there's that. But yeah, I mean, maps are one way to really set up your game. Now, be prepared for your players to ask questions about your map. Hopefully they're going to ask questions about your map. If your players don't ask questions about your map, um, you probably didn't make it right. I hate to say that, but if it's not evocative, um, it's probably not doing its job. And if the players aren't interested and curious in it, then they're probably not going to want to explore it. Now, you can make it more interesting later on, and I don't want you to feel like you totally failed, but it probably means that you're going to have to do a little bit more work to get people out into that setting. Keep on the Borderlands, famously, set up to get players out there. It's got a keep on the Borderlands, in fact. And then it's got a woodland area where a very small stretch of land in which there are several things going on. There's still enough room in that map, though, to place other encounters. Um, or you can place them just to the left, right, top, or bottom of the map. You can place them off to the side. There is, if you go to Drive Through RPG, um, there's a product there where a guy has scanned in his hand-drawn expansions to that map, and it's immense. The amount of territory he's mapped. It is just hand-drawn maps, and so it's both charming in that respect, and a little hard to read sometimes. But at the same time, it's what we all did back in the day. Get some graph paper, start mapping. I mean, that keep on the Borderlands wilderness map is even on grid paper, square grid paper, whereas hexes took over later on. And Daniel Kearney, this is true. You may need new players. At the same time, it may not just be a player issue. I think it's too easy to blame the players sometimes. First of all, not all players are created equal. Not all players are as comfortable asking questions. Not all players are hooked by the same things. Spiffy names may not really draw out your players. There are people who their brains do not create pictures for themselves. It is a thing. It's an actual thing. It's a psychological thing. Some people's brains do not allow them to create abstract pictures in their mind. And so if I put out the elf wood on a map, some players are going to go, oh, it's probably a deep, dark, magical forest full of elves and strange, fey woodland creatures. And another player is going to be, it's called the elf wood. And that's fine. Those are two different people. But to blame those people, the second player there, for being less of a player, as I don't, and I'm not saying this is what you meant necessarily, but I don't think it's really always the player. Sometimes the DM needs to do a little bit more work, or sometimes the DM needs to change tack. Yes, DMs are often called the most important player, but a DM who doesn't have players at his table is kind of playing with himself, and that's it can only be so fun. Um, Funny enough, so is my wife. It's interesting. We were talking about this the other day, and she's like, if you tell me to imagine an apple, she doesn't, she remembers what an apple looks like, but she can't conjure an image of an apple in her head. And I think that's probably one of those things that really distinguishes artistic people from non-artistic people is, if you ask me to make an apple and you give me the right sculpting material, I can generally make you an apple, or I can draw you an apple, or I'm not professionally trained. I've only had high school art classes, and a lot of practice and a lot of fucking around. I used to be better than I am, which really sucks. God, I hate that. Like I used to be able to draw mecha, like really detailed mecha, and I can't anymore. Um, but yeah, so um, your map is one way to engage your players, but what's on your map is most important. Um, but also, I think setting up the right home base, if that is your kind of campaign, is important as well. Um, your home base has to have the things that if it's going to be a functional home base, it has to have the things that'll get the players by early in the game. It can have stuff that'll continue to support them later in the game, but it has to have what'll get them by early in the game. It has to have some sort of healing resource. It has to have a place for them to buy basic materials. It has to have a place for them to uh, buy weapons and equipment, or at least have their weapons and equipment repaired. Um, it has to have those things. It has to have a place for them to sleep. It has to have a place for them to buy food. It has to have, and most importantly, it has to have a network, a mechanism by which they can gain new adventure ideas. Now, this doesn't always have to be built into the town. It just has to be built into the setting. In my current game, because it is a wilderness, it's not a wilderness, but it is a frontier. My current game is set well away from its parent nation, um, in a land that was sort of abandoned by its parent nation. The background there is at one point they were trying to conquer the land. They realized that the land wasn't really easy enough for them to take and hold by being across the sea without a land route. Um, and so the nobility kind of pulled out, except for one city that's on the coast. Um, Now a bunch of the people stayed there because they had homes, they had lives. It was good. It was doing fine for them. So it's this big agricultural land on the edge of a wilderness. Um, that also means though that there aren't um, a lot of you don't have like the magic resources, but my players have learned that there are traveling merchants that come from a land far to the south on a land route or a sea route, depending, that their whole culture is magical. They're like humans where everybody has some sort of innate magic. And that innate magic is basically they're humans who all have detect magic effectively built in. They can kind of sniff it out, but they're a magical society, and so every so often, if these guys are in town, they might be able to get an item, or they might be able to sell an item. This is the other thing too, is they've been able to sell items, but because they have also this really cool setting, this core town that they work with. It's actually two towns that are sort of two villages that form a greater township. One's a toll bridge that's got all the metropolitan stuff, and the other one is their kind of agricultural village. Um, they have the ability to network with the greater world outside and to get influxes of information and quest ideas and stuff like that without having to have it necessarily built into the town. They've had also the ability, for example, what players coming back from a dungeon with lots and lots of gold and then pouring that into a township is um, you know going to be next to impossible for that township to really handle. Like, oh, I've got this diamond, it's worth 10,000 gold pieces, can I trade it in? Nobody in town has that much money. Um but um I, because they're well established members of families in the town. One character is the daughter of the innkeeper. One character is the son of the local gnome clockmaker. Why there's a clockmaker in this obscure village? That's a potential plot point. But at the same time, they're known. So like, okay, you can't give me all the gold on this. I'm just gonna start a line of credit. Yeah, and here's my security, this diamond, and usually they'll get a percentage of that. But and that's kind of going into the minutia. um RW Bishop, this is when art, illustrations and art are really good. A lot of times when I am creating a setting, I will do like a Pinterest board for it, and that way, uh, if my players are having a hard time imagining things, um, I can throw this out there. Saxius has benefited from that in the Frontier game that we're playing. That I was playing on. I've had to kind of back out due to some other real life obligations. But in the Frontier game that Saxius is running on Sundays, um, I had a bunch. I have wanted to run that kind of campaign too. So I have a Pinterest board, which is all these like really cool medieval wood forts and wood castles. Um, that I was able to share with him to help him with his set the tone for his campaign. Um, and it so Pinterest boards are really good that way, um, especially if you're dealing with touch points, cultural touch points that may not be well known to to others. Like I really love the Bronze Age. Not a lot of people are super tuned into what the Bronze Age looks like. So I have a Bronze Age Pinterest. So if I was to run something like Glorantha, which is ostensibly Bronze Age based, or I have a mythic, it's not Theros, but Theros helps me with its rules. Um, I want to run a 5e campaign where everybody's basically playing Greek style heroes. That I have that to work with as well. Um, but so pictures are definitely good. So Cal, for me, the Bronze Age appeals because the Bronze Age is a point in history that really looks like fantasy. Um, the weapons are just a little odd. The armor is just a little off. Everybody's dressed in ways that defy modern clothing. You get to the Middle Ages, trousers, shirts, that's all there. But back in the Bronze Age, it's skirts and kilts and weird things, and armor is just they're not. You got chariots too. Chariots are just they're nearly pure fantasy. Hey, Mac, welcome. Glad you made it. Um, you in your impressive hat. I really like to imagine that you wear the hat while you're watching the stream, but that might just be weird. But um, so hey, Jason, welcome. All right, cool. So kind of talked about the minimum details you have to give the players, um, what a map really is useful to have, and started talking about town resources. So one of the things I mentioned is really important to your starting town if you're going to have one. Now, sometimes that's not your campaign. Sometimes your players are strangers in a strange land, and the whole game is about them finding the resources they need, making friends, finding allies, forging their own way. And that's perfectly legitimate too. Um, let's see, just but man, my brain is just gone this morning. um, yeah, I'll place the link to the Discord. Let me go ahead and grab it here. Do. The Discord is also called Elfbait. Let's see. Invite the peoples. The link to the Discord is also often in my show notes, if I ever remember to actually put them in there. But hey, there's the Discord link. All right. The ability to find and go on quests is probably the most important part of any campaign, whether it's in a home base, like a village or something to that effect, or uh, God, I am really sorry, folks. My brain is scattered. Whether it's in a home base or some other mechanism. If you're not going to have a home base, then you probably have to work a little bit more on having local storytellers, have them run into legends in town, um, ancient obelisks that they encounter in the desert that have words that they might do a rubbing of or copy in their book and then bring into town. You need to work to make sure that they can find those those uh, those plot hooks, those adventure seeds, um, and then be willing to completely throw that out when they go on a tangent. Um, but how you do that though is there's a couple of mechanisms you can do for that. Um, you can have stories show up in town. A rumor table is a time honored one. Rumor tables are great, but they only go so far because you can only have so many rumors on that table. Now, if you're doing homebrew, you can make up more rumors as you go, and you can also adjust that table. Um, when I do a rumor table too, I include things that aren't true and I note them as such. So it's often, things that the players might hear, um, that give them bad information. However, bad information can still be a quest hook. For example, there's hidden bandit treasure on the old knoll outside of town. Could be wrong, and then the players go out there and then they find a barrow, and now they're on a little bit of a dungeon crawl. Um, there might still be treasure there, so your hooks don't always have to be factual, um, and to still be effective and good. Um, I mean, stories change over time too, so any story that the players run into about a thing, uh, could definitely still be a real hook. The details might be different. How often have we seen in fantasy that there's a legend about an ancient princess who was entombed by her vile paramour who didn't want her to be you know seen by anybody else, and it turns out that that's just a bullshit story that they cooked up because she was actually an evil witch who was enchanting people to fall in love with her, and she was finally caught on her own bullshit and locked away, and now she's probably in that dungeon, angry as hell, and some sort of undead. Um, let's see. I'm going to take a moment here and take a look at some of the comments, starred comments here. Let's see. Let's see. This is also true, yes. Uh, let's see. So, RPG Dad. To help yourself with immersion, make one of these. This is available on Amazon. It is 600 pages of fine grid paper, and fill it with your ideas. That's a Spelljammer pirate captain. You know, um, here's a dungeon map. These are really useful, and any ideas I have with little visual representations or sketches that I make, these can help me later on to refer to. Um, and it's any idea too. Crazy crab dungeon. Yeah. So I mean, this I use quite frequently. I've run campaigns. I've run adventures straight out of this journal too, because a lot of them are written like this: map with all of the pertinent information written in the notes. And the nice thing is, this thing is kind of a moleskin type cover. I wrote on it with silver Sharpie. I've got it on the spine too. It needs to be reapplied, but it lays flat. The grid squares are perfect for writing in and for drawing in maps, illustrations, whatever. Get it, keep it near you. When I worked in the office, this went with me every day to work. And when I had an idea, I would sit there and I would write stuff down on it. Um, there are the seagoing version of Baba Yaga's hut that walks on stilts across the ocean. For my nautical campaign, it's useful. Wasn't expensive. I think it was maybe in the $20 range, if that. Um, and the grid space is really small, so you can draw a pretty decent sized dungeon per page. Let's see, but it will help to have those notes when you're trying to do immersion. When you're writing up adventures, if you write up adventures, try bullet pointing key points. Bullet point wet, bullet point squeaking animal noises, bullet point mossy, musky smell. Write that down. So when you get to that room, you can pull it out real quick. A lot of modern OSR modules are doing this kind of bullet pointy thing, because while brick text is great, the whole read aloud text is great. A lot of people don't like to use it, but having the bullet points there really helps. The other thing you'll see a lot of times is while they will have the read aloud text, they will bold key points. When I write my stuff, I tend to do that. Writing the stuff out for me, writing like flavor text out helps ingrain it in my brain. Even though I may not read it verbatim, I know what the room is. I've written it out. It's imprinted. When I skim it again, I have those bolded points that help me recall the greater sum of what I wrote. Let's see. Well, yeah, you definitely want to start with a tried and true when running new folks. A village, a town. If you were going to want to try to do something a little bit more interesting, not more interesting, that's bad. If you're going to try something that's off the beaten path, but still for beginners, let's say you're doing a nautical game, make their ship basically their village. Have it populated by a captain and a crew that perhaps are employed by them, or maybe they're members of that crew, but that they can rely upon to fulfill the tasks. Have the ship have a healer who's like a low-level cleric who all he can do is cast a couple of spells, to cure, maybe, to heal some damage, cure some wounds. That's why there's never scurvy on that boat. But yeah, let's see. Mechhead, Jason. So I feel like this is one of those time-honored problems DMs are always going to have. If you are an imaginative, creative DM, or a DM or a DM who's run a lot of campaigns, your newer campaigns are likely starting to get a little bit more esoteric. You want to play new things. You want to try things that you maybe haven't done before. And those can sometimes be harder for players to grasp. And this is one of those situations where it may be a case where you actually need new players, because your players are only going to play what they can understand. If they can't grasp it, they're not going to play it. And that is, the only other way is to really maybe examine the setting you're trying to run and change the entry point for that setting. I made a campaign setting where it took place after the fall of a great empire and after the recovery of the remnants of that empire. I realized after running it that I set it in the wrong place. Now, this is not that the players didn't get it, but sometimes where the point I'm trying to go is adjusting your tack on the campaign can make the campaign a little bit easier for them to insert, or a little bit more active. My campaign was set in a time of relative peace with not a lot going on. So it really was kind of bland. What I should have done is set it during the recovery, during the reconstruction after the fall of the empire, when things were a lot more chaotic and up in the air. Then there would have been a lot more going on. Um, and so if your players are having a hard time understanding or grasping the concept that you're trying to lay out, maybe find a different point to enter them. If the idea for your campaign is big and you want to start them big, maybe change from starting them big. Have them find a way for them to start small and then work up to the big, so they understand it as their characters understand it. Um, when I'm running really weird campaign settings, I often try to run it with characters who are from outside that setting, so the players learn with their characters. Um, I have a sort of weird underworld, dreamlandsy, Carcosa kind of weird setting that I absolutely want to run it using characters who are from a conventional D&D style game world who have run into this setting. The setting is high enough power too to where the campaign arc would look like relatively low level regular adventurers seeking out a way to get to this place and then getting there. And then by the time they get there, they're decent enough level to deal with what they find there. A lot of the stuff that they would find there is juxtaposed against the concepts and the way and the ideas that they would understand from the world above, but a lot of it is just plain foreign and weird. And so having the players have to experience that with their characters helps them grasp and understand the things that they're running into. Yeah, I mean, if they are experienced, you can definitely just say, okay, you're playing, you know, cutthroats, adventurers, maybe, their whole thing is, they've got a ship and they're out exploring. Maybe they're traveling under a letter of marque. Maybe they are running from those who have a letter of marque. You could definitely get my Vagabond Seas campaign is designed to take players from first level out to big things, and it does a little bit of what I was just talking about, where it takes them from the land to this archipelago known as the Vagabond Seas, um, where there's a lot of stuff going on, and they can really just find out for themselves. Let's see. Yeah, they were false, or like much as in movies, they're often the legends are false, but there is a truth there that is different than the legend, and that is where the adventure comes from. I mean, if you think about it, if you're a Call of Cthulhu player, those kind of legends are great. Oh, we're gonna go find this ancient city of gold. Well, yes, it's gold colored, but what is this alien metal, and what are those weird squiddly diddly mushroom headed crab, lobster, fungus things that are in all the relief art on the walls? Let's see. Thank you, Cody. I'm not sure which one you were referring to. You'll have to hit me up on Discord and let me know what you were talking about. Let's see. Oh, here's one for RPG Dad. I'm sure you saw it, but I'll highlight it. Um, yeah, that's kind of what I was saying too. When I write adventures, I tend to write them as if I was going to publish them to to kind of concrete my ideas on the page and also in my brain. Um, this is something I am working on as well. So I totally get it. Um, for me, the adventuring journal helped because at least I could get the DM journal helped because at least I could get the basics down. And a lot of times, if you just can scribble out those ideas or draw down a sketch of that map, you can come back to it later and you have it. But if you're not able to get back to it, at least you have the base concept and you didn't lose it. So try that. It definitely helps. It also takes making time. It takes a conscious effort. Um, it's hilarious. The biggest example of this, honestly, is my second child. Um, I very much was of the mindset that I wanted to wait to the right time to try for our second kid. Um, Full background: when I met my wife, she had an 8-month old, so my oldest is technically my step. Always been dad. There's no step involved. However, when we decided to have a child together, um, me and my brother are 6 years apart, and it worked out really well. So I was all set on, let's try and make sure there's a decent sized gap between the two of them, and wanted to wait for the right time. My wife was very quick to convince me to make me see the light of that, which is that the right time is never going to come along, and that we just need to make a decision to do it. Um, so when finding time, you're never going to find time to do things. You're going to have to make time. You're going to have to make time to write adventures. You're going to have to make time to think about your ideas. I can't stress the DM's journal enough. Um, um, DM's journal enough because it does help fill the gap between those times that you can make. Um, let's see. This is true for some folks. There are a lot of folks, I like to consider myself among them, who can pull a lot out of nothing. I can pull entire adventures out of my ass. Um, so it's just, yeah, it's just one of those things. Um, Bullet points are good. Bullet points are definitely good. Um, Going back to the adventure to the DM's journal, um, yeah, put down your base ideas, bullet point your stuff. You can always fill it out later, but if you end up having to run it with and you are not able to make the time to do that, then you can always go ahead and use those bullet points to guide you. Uh, let's see. Yeah, I mean, make the world what you can. I will. I may talk about my favorites and things I like and I don't like, but I want to make it abundantly clear. I am all for everybody playing what they want to play, how they want to play it, and if you enjoy it, that's the only thing that really matters. If you and your players are having a good time, that's all that matters. Unless what you're playing is absolutely some sort of douchey, middle finger, and you're doing it as a way specifically to do that. Um, yeah, I don't have any complaints. Play what you want. And at this, and I genuinely am happy for anybody who's playing something and enjoying it, even if I don't like it. Um, you know, it is it is the most important thing. Um, to that, I want to do a real quick side note. If somebody tells you that a game is a way, don't take their word on it. I avoided Call of Cthulhu for decades because of what people always told me about it made it sound unappealing. When I finally got around to running it, well, actually, let me back up a bit. When I finally got around to discovering Seth Gorkowski's channel and listening to his coverage of the rules and his experiences with the game, it completely changed my outlook on the game. And it is by far probably my favorite game to run right now. Had I discovered it back then, I might have just switched to being a Call of Cthulhu guy and not a D&D guy. Um, I enjoy it that much. The seventh edition rules are part of that, but at the same time, I guess when what I'm trying to say is find a way to try a game that you're interested in. Don't walk away based on somebody or even a lot of somebody's constant diatribe. All I ever heard about Call of Cthulhu is, oh yeah, and the characters always die or go insane. That sounded like no fun to me, and it sounded like a really shitty way to build a game. It's not what the game is about. It's not how the game is built. There are systems in the game that are very much clearly there to keep characters alive. So yeah. But anyways, I digress. Surprise, surprise. Let's see. Yes, yes, yes. Uh it's the dread domain idea is a very cool way to run a side quest. I always thought that one of the best things to come out of the Ravenloft box set was the concept of the dread domains, um, and the fact that they sort of had a will of their own, because it was a great way to take a diversion into another style of gaming. Because you could have the party swallowed up by the mists, you could then also have the party spit out by the mists potentially if you wanted to. Um, let's see. Lots of funny comments. Anyways, so wow. Let's see. I have often said that the Palladium. I've thought about running Palladium using an OSR D&D system. Um, while Palladium is a good system in its own right, it can be fiddly sometimes. But that world, oh, that world is so great. It's a great old school world. Okay, yeah. Let's see. Hey, nerd, welcome. I'm so far behind. You guys are so talkative. It's only me. All right, so let's see. My wife is listening to the stream, and I can hear it from downstairs. Uh, but let's see. Where are we at? All right, I'm all caught up. It's a lot of chit chat here and there, but so where was I? I was at building a strong base. Um, so yeah, if you're not going to have a hometown, you have to have other ways for people to get information. Um, Traveling storytellers, bards, um, old hermits in the woods. These are ways to create uh, resources for your players that are there, but not necessarily all nicely tied up in a bow. Um, in my current campaign, there is a wizard. He is 3 days travel from the village, requiring the party to spend at least, actually he's about 5 days from the village because he's like 3 days upriver and then 2 days across it through the forest. But they can go to him, and he's powerful, and he's a safe space in the woods too, because like he's got his own little place set up there. But they have to go out of their way. So it has created situations in the campaign where they've had to make the time choice. Do we go to the wizard, or do we find another way to do it? Do we have time to go to the wizard? Um, and so he's there and he's available, but he's not easy to get to necessarily. Um, you can have your clerics, for example. If you don't have a healer or a priest in town, you can always place, a monastery or an abbey or something, a day or so outside of town. And that way the players do have to travel a little bit. They will have to undertake the dangers of the road, although they're probably going to be minimal in a civilized area. Um, but also, your resources don't have to come free. Um, your resources can come at a price. If you have a convenient healer in the village, well, maybe he requires some sort of a tithe, or maybe he requires tasks for the party to perform. Um, hey, Curtis and Dice Tales, welcome. Um, so you can have those resources there. But you don't have to make them easily attainable. Um, if you've got a blacksmith in town, maybe that blacksmith can only make a certain grade of weapon. Maybe he's not able to make or repair swords because they require better metalworking than he's able to do. Maybe he primarily is there for making horseshoes and hinges and nails and metal fittings for agriculture, but he's not there to make fine blades. And so, he's available to maybe patch a piece of existing armor, or you know, fix a broken mace, but he's not going to be there to craft a sword or find a better sword. So then your players have to go to other resources, or they might have to rely on stuff that they pick up off of monsters or other encounters they run into, or they might have to quest for these things. Um, I'm not a huge fan of settings with magic shops. That is a type of fantasy, yes, and it can be fun, but it is not for me. Um, Honestly, if I could get away with it, I would run most of my campaigns as really low magic without uh, a lot of spellcasters. Currently, my game is set that way. I mean, Guillemon the Wizard is the only wizard in the area except for the court mage at Greyhawk, which is the only city in the setting. The other casters that are in the party they're the other casters in the area. Um, Other than ones they encounter. I mean, say we have a sorcerer in the party, we had a druid in the party, and even that druid started out as an apprentice to the other local druid, um, and then and we have a cleric in the party now too. There are maybe more clerics in my setting because clerical magic is more accessible. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, I will say this: doing a notice, like a handout notice that the party might find on a sign somewhere, is a great way to intro a campaign. For a frontier exploration campaign that I had set up, I had written out a notice from the emperor, uh, looking for able-bodied folks, and it offered money, it offered pardons, um, it offered the waiving of certain charges, and basically it was a call for anybody who would be willing to push into this wilderness. And you can do a lot by the wording in those to set the tone for your campaign. If the offer is simple monetary, then the ruler who's putting that out there is probably not too desperate. If that ruler, however, is willing to pardon crimes, uh, commute death sentences, um, you know, grant indulgences, or give land, he's probably a little bit more desperate, and the stakes are a little higher. So, in the language of your notice, you can actually go ahead and put that forward, um, and really set out a concept for what the stakes are in your upcoming campaign. Uh, Yeah, magical items should be rare. In my current game, they're probably a little bit more abundant than I would normally run them, but I was also trying to run my current game to be much more in the spirit of 5e. So um, I was trying to run it because I wanted to run it to be a 5e game and not to be a game like I used to run pigeonholed into 5e. There were some things I could do setting wise, like having just a couple of wizards, but that was about it. Let's see. You know, so in 5e, I don't feel so bad about giving out a lot of magic items because in 5e, the magic items are less consequential than they were in old school. Um, the abilities of the characters in 5th edition often outstretch the abilities of magic items they will find, unless they're finding very unique magic items. Whereas in AD&D, BX, 2nd edition, those magic items really were what ended up defining a lot of the characters. Um, so yeah, you definitely want to. It definitely depends on the kind of campaign you're running and the system you're running, because that +1 Warhammer means a shit ton more to a first edition, 2nd edition character than it does to a 5e character. 5e character doesn't need that. He's just as good with a regular weapon, other than the ability to injure magical creatures. And there are things you can do in your settings to even mitigate the need for magic weapons, like with bonuses. Some settings I've run, it's actually kind of a common one in most of my campaigns. There is a thing called Elven Steel. Elven Steel is forged over magical fire and therefore is imbued with an innate magic, even though it doesn't have any bonuses. And therefore, any weapon made of Elven Steel can affect creatures that require magic weapons, um, but it doesn't have any bonuses. Uh, Elven Steel weapons in 5e uh, also all have the finesse stat, no matter what the weapon is. The idea being that Elven Steel is light and its innate magical nature allows it to be wielded with more fluidity. Um, at the same time, I have dwarven armor that's made out of armor that meteoric iron that I and weapons that are made out of meteoric iron that I stole the name Gromril from Warhammer, and that armor is innately magic dampening. So, if you're wearing Gromril plate, you get, like, I think in AD&D terms, it's a really low magic resistance, but it's still a magic resistance, because I've been running Gromril since 2nd edition, I think. But yeah, so there's you can do interesting things with your setting, and that's the other thing too. When you're setting up your campaign, you want to maybe tease your players with some of those little things. If there are things that are unique to the world that are flavoring, like Elven Steel and Gromril, it might be worth mentioning up front to the players that yes, and there are fantastic forms of metal in this world. We have Elven Steel and we have Gromril, and, and they'll be like, "What's Gromril?" And you're like, "Well, it's this." I use Mithril in my games. I used Mithril in my games since AD&D. Mithril Silver was worth more than platinum back in the day. It was like, what, one Mithril was worth like 50 gold or something like that. This is the way we used to run it because it was so rare. But also, it was one of the only currency metals that could also be used as forging metal. Like, nobody's gonna go out and have a gold sword, but yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is my wife. Uh, my wonderful wife, and yes, they forget half the magic stuff they have half the time, anyways. Um, I often find myself in reminding them as the DM. I'm like, in that last fight, you could have used this. Um, but I think that speaks to 5e again. I think, and I'm not edition warring here at all, but just some differences in the game. When the magic items are important to you, like they were in AD&D, you tend to remember them more. Um, in 5e, when you can get by without them, it's easy to forget about them. Let's see. I have not run a Bronze Age game either. Um, this is, but I do plan on running it. If you're looking for, I don't know what edition of D&D you play, um, but if you pick up the old um, Arms and Equipment Guide, I think it is, from second edition. It's really excellent for it talks about uh, bronze plate and all of that in different types of armor from different periods of time, and it gives good descriptions. Um, Also, I think the Combat and Tactics book for late second edition, sort of 2.5, covers that as well. Let's see. But there could be. You never know. I mean, you could make one. Let's see. Basic through. Yeah, I mean, so I mean, I the rules are easily translatable to any system, to be honest. Bronze armor generally has a lower armor class than um, versus iron weapons and stuff. I think is how they worked it. Um, but against itself, it's like metals. Um, let's see. Yeah, Bronze Age game. See a meteor landing in the distance. Go get it. Meteoric iron. Yep. Let's see. So yeah, I think honestly, kind of we're going into specifics on magic items. All right, so I'm gonna put this out to the chat here. What are some key tricks and tips that you have um, for setting up a good foundation for a campaign for your players? What are some top things that you would suggest doing? And I mean, in all seriousness, what you would do to help your players access your game? And I'll wait. um, so while I'm doing this, I'm gonna pull up a couple things here. Um, I've got. Let me pull up here. So I keep talking about my current campaign, um, and I'm gonna go ahead and pull up a picture of the map that I'm using. This map grew from originally just being around the Farfields area, and now it is this. So let me see if I can get it to pull up. Here we go. So this is the world we're playing in currently. And it started with just this area. And then it's grown organically as the party has traveled around here. Well, actually, it started out with the Blackhorn Forest and Farfields and kind of this area. But yeah, it's grown. Um, and currently, the party is all the way up here. Um, yeah, it's been a fun campaign. They've been as far as to up to here. Um, but there are certain parts of the map that were there from the very beginning that they haven't even been to. They've not been to the Death Kiss Swamp. They've not been up this area that's been in there since the beginning. They've not gone into the Grimjaw Badlands. Um, so there's plenty of stuff that they haven't even checked on or gone to that have been there since the very beginning. All right, so in comes the flood of comments and suggestions. Incorporate backstories. Typically, a player will have an idea for the kind of story there. Um, yes, to a point. I would say keep in mind backstories, but trying to weave every backstory in can often be clunky. And if you do it too obviously, then players may start to resent the fact that one player is getting their backstory touched on while others are not. So you have to be careful with that one. Um, Talking to NPCs, dungeon worlds, exactly. Talking to NPCs is a big thing. Um, your players though will need to learn real quick uh, that NPCs are worth talking to. The one of the big things you will run into a lot of times is that players don't want to talk to NPCs. And if this is happening, if you find this happening, it's probably because your NPCs are either not interesting or are going on too much beyond what the players are asking them. So I think one of the keys to NPCs is to have their responses be short and sweet and useful, or obviously not useful. But if your NPCs are also always grumpy old people or gruff, curmudgeons that never want to help the party, they're going to stop talking to them. So that's a good one, but you do have to should be careful on that one. Um, so there's a two-part from Mac here. Um, know what you want to play, not just system, but style. And then second, what are you willing able to run knowledge base? This is a good one. It's tricky because sometimes your players don't want to play what you want to play or what you can play. But definitely know where your limits are. If if you're not good at intrigue, don't play Vampire the Masquerade. Let's see. Yeah, I mean everything depends on the campaign you're running, but I mean I would say what we're looking for here are general tips and tricks that people can take away that they may not have thought about. I mean, I've got a lot of ideas myself, but we got a lot of experienced players and GMs in the chat here, and I feel like we can use this as an opportunity to really glom that collective knowledge together. Uh, I run a custom setting with pretty deep lore and lots of differences compared to Forgotten Realms. So I put together an interactive map that shows highlights, snippets of history. Um, cool. Nerds Nerd, are you using a tool like World Anvil or something like that for that? Let's see. Honestly, if this is what they want in their game, then more power to them. Um, everybody should play the games that they want to play the way that they want to play them. Let's see. I think organized sandbox in this case, while I agree with you, I will also say I think that a lot of people misunderstand, misconstrue, misinterpret, whatever term you want to use, what a sandbox actually is. Um, Sandboxes are often seen as setting or big maps with not anything specific going on, and I think that with the lack of organization, I think that's incorrect. I think what people are thinking about there is a hex crawl, where you go from hex to hex and you kind of randomly determine what's in each hex. Sandboxes generally are, here's a bunch of stuff. How you interact with it and play with it is up to you. And that's I feel like again I agree with you there, um, and I feel like a good example would be Hyboria. The Conan setting that is there um, is a place with lots of locations that have been detailed throughout his adventures. If you're going to plunk somebody down into that, then they know that if I go to Zamora, it's going to be this way. If I go to Aquilonia, it's going to be this way. And they can just travel around and kind of seek the adventures that they want to go. If they want jungle adventures, then they go to the jungle, and so you can do that. Your idea is a cool one, and I wanted to use it, but it does rely on a certain technical proficiency among your players, um, and a willingness. So while interactive maps are great, and I fully endorse them if you can make use of them, Um, Paper and pencil is sometimes, or at least a PDF, the equivalent is the speed for a lot of folks. Um, uh, so Dice Tales, they haven't seen all of the map. I snippeted only a good chunk of what they have gone to, and Fog Award, most of it. So I was just flashing it up there. My wife is the only one of my players that's in the chat right now, and she's my wife, so she's seen the map. So, um, uh, let's see. Yeah, I mean, you're always going to customize it to your players. But what are those things that you, even if it depends on the group, they're always going to still need the same things. And I think that, um, from a more general point of view, I think what you're trying to say here is we need to have a hook that engages the the party, that engages the players, or hooks. There's no use in doing heroic quest hooks if your party is a bunch of evil players, unless, of course, they're playing their evil characters correctly. And even an evil player is going to see the benefit of going on a heroic quest for the sake of personal gain, or furthering his goals, uh, something to that effect. Let's see. Hey, Mage's Musings. Glad you made it. I will have to be going in about 15 minutes, just to let folks know. My Sundays have become a little tighter. You'll notice that this particular stream was rated to go from 10 a.m. to 11:45. As I mentioned in another stream, I am I have returned to therapy, and so my therapy is at noon. So, uh, making them role play is important. Um, uh, you may have to teach people how to role play. I think it's important also to make sure that your players understand that role playing isn't silly voices. Role playing is actually making choices based on who their character is, not who they are necessarily. And funny voices are just icing on the cake. Um, yeah, I think way too many people, especially nowadays, get hung up on role playing being about silly voices and playing with mannerisms. You can get really far with just third person description. My character does such and such, or even speaking about your character in the third person, like Sir Avagor is going to walk up to the bar and he's going to, with a jaunty tone. You can describe your inflections and stuff rather than having to actually act them out. I think a lot of people forget about that, so that's a good one. But it helps as a DM getting players into the game to remind them that they don't have to be actors to act. They can still role play through description. But description is important. And in fact, the earlier you can instill describing what they do rather than trying to gamify it, like, you know, I'm going to go up and try and use my persuasion on the guard versus I'm going to go up to the guard and I'm going to, subtly talk to him about da 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 da. And then but that I'm preaching to the choir there, I'm sure, Dice Tales. Um, let's see. Look, I'm just gonna say it. There are people to whom this is important, and they're certainly entitled to have the games that they want to have, and we're entitled, just like you're entitled to have the games that you want. Um, I, you know, completely support that. If you want to avoid that in your games, that's totally cool. Um, I will say that I'm not going to, in any way, shape, or form, try to demean folks who want to play that way, because I'm not in their position and I don't necessarily have the same feelings on the topic that they do. Uh, like I said, to some people it's important, and to others it is not. And we don't have to play together, but we should always at least respect each other enough to understand that what is for you may not be for me, and just leave it at that. Not trying to call you out specifically, Cal. It's the conversation that's I wanted to speak to, because you know disabilities are real and they're real to people, and sometimes it's important for them to include that in their fantasy empowerment. Um, I've known some disabled folks to whom that is not part of their thing, and they want to play something completely different. But everybody's different. I don't tend to play paladins anymore because I realized that paladins were too much like myself. I'm too much of a goody goody, and I'm too much a by the book, don't like to break the law kind of guy, and that just wasn't role playing. So, anyways, wasn't trying to call anybody specifically out on it. It's a thing. And you know, I think a lack of respect, and that's wrong. I feel like we need to remember that we're all people, and we don't have to necessarily agree on everything, but at the same time, um, we can still play nice. In starting in media res is a good one. Um, you know, that's excellent for action based games. My pulp games that I run tend to start in media res. Um, that kind of goes with the go with kind of goes with the genre. Um, but yeah, it is if it's made out of wood. But then again, magic items are immune to rust monsters anyways. So, rust monsters don't destroy magic weapons. Let's see. It's funny you mentioned this. Some of the Call of Cthulhu scenarios do center themselves around interestingly um, abled or marginalized communities. There's one that I saw reviewed recently where all the characters in the game are homeless people, and it is played with all seriousness and not in any way, shape, or form in any sort of activism or anything like that. Maybe a hint of awareness, in so much that the life of homeless folks sucks, and I don't think anybody's going to debate that. Um, but it really does build on the horror by isolating the characters and being marginalized portion of the population. They're not going to get listened to, and so it really does help ramp up the horror in the game. So the having wheelchair characters in a game, if it was done with all due respect and seriousness, or even other abled people, could be an interesting campaign, because especially in a horror game, what is the effect of sanity on somebody who understands the world differently? Especially if we're talking about like people who have existing levels of mental illness or things like that as well, or even people who are mentally handicapped. What is the effect of sanity on somebody who doesn't quite get it? Part of the Call of Cthulhu rules for sanity is if you fail your sanity check, you then have to make an intelligence check to see if you understood the horror of what you just saw. So if we're dealing with disabilities in games, it can be an interesting idea. You have to really do it with kid gloves because you don't want to be insulting, you don't want to be insensitive. Just like everybody who's ever played a blind character in an RPG and then goes ahead and gives them some sort of ability that lets them function as if they were sighted anyways, is not really playing a blind character. Um, and very few people I've ever seen want to play the blind master actually play them as blind. Um, but yeah, there are there are whole horror movies that are written around characters who have a disability. Was it Rear Window sort of plays on that, having the person who's like stuck in a wheelchair. Maybe I'm remembering the title of a movie wrong, but stuck in the wheelchair. They're not permanently disabled, but temporarily they can't walk. And then what is the horror of that? We've had blind characters in horror movies. We've had deaf characters in horror movies. We've had blind antagonists in horror movies, interestingly enough. Don't Breathe. Um, let's see. Uh, Gamma World. Okay, back to the topic here. In Gamma World, they allowed the players to start with one artifact. The only condition is it can't be a weapon. Players have chosen this things like opera glasses, set of keys, pair. That is a cool way to do it. I think it allows them to really get into their characters in the post-apocalyptic sense too. We've always seen those movies where the characters got some little bit. Mad Max had his music box and his spyglass. If you remember, he pulls out the spyglass. You've got. I remember if you've ever read David Drake's The General series. Um, we've got people living in the post-apocalypse of a interstellar empire, and they're wearing circuit boards around their neck that are all filigreed and stuff as medallions of the ancient tech priests or tech spirits. Uh, let's see. I'm just going to go ahead and skim through a couple of. Yeah, this is a good point. You're correct. Avoiding is a form of tolerance. And I don't want to belabor this point too much, but I guess it's all in how you conduct it. If you simply just bow out and say, not my jam, and move on, cool. I see far too many people though wanting to tear people a new one for even thinking about it. Considering the other stuff I have seen show up in fantasy RPGs over the years, a wheelchair is by far not the most egregious inclusion. I've seen people want to invent go gadget helicopters for themselves. I have seen people create telescoping halberds that can go out to like 15 feet long. I've seen people create, and this is by people I mean me, create flying chariots that have no horses and have twin mounted repeating wands of fireball on them. Now, granted, I was in 6th grade when I did that, but still. So, whatever. I think if somebody wanted to have a wheelchair in a game, I think I would be doing them a disservice if they didn't have to function with a wheelchair in a game. That's my take on it. So if you had a wheelchair in the game, cool. Maybe, I mean, wheelchairs have been around for a long time historically, and and other ways to handle various handicaps. So it stands to reason that we could have them in a game. Let's see. Well, and see, this is the thing too. Yes, this is that's a good one. I'm sure it's played to a certain degree for laughs. Um, and that's not a bad thing. And you're right though. If you had a dwarven berserker and he's like, they only took my legs. I can still kick their asses. He's still gonna want to get out there, and you might even build him to where he had like a dude who is pushing him, like a big old armored dwarf who's like pushing him along, so he's got full mobility and use of both of his arms for 2 axes. You could play that off. I mean, what they did that in the Vikings series where they had Ivar the Boneless had the chariot built for himself. You know, you can do it. And there are a lot of villains and heroes in classic literature who work from a position of handicap, and they find a way to deal with it in their world. And this is exactly your table, your rules. I will go back to the other caveat I made earlier, though. However, if you are too strict with your rules at your table, you may find yourself playing with yourself. As a GM, if you don't have players, you don't have a game. So Being inflexible on this and being too tight with this attitude is going to make you a very lonely DM. Unless you have a giant player base, in which case you can afford to be choosy. Let's see. All right, and so let's see. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to read the rest of them. I do have to get going. It's been a good conversation. You know where you can continue this conversation and any conversations you might have. That's over on the Discord. It's a Discord. I have it. I made it. It's got lots of categories for both role playing and miniature gaming. Here's the link again. Come join, come talk, come interact, post your stuff, post reactions to other people's stuff. Let's have some discussions. It's there. Uh, and while I may not disagree with everything that you guys say, and I may actually talk to you about those disagreements, I respect your positions on things and I respect that people have different opinions. Let's communicate, let's talk, let's not get angry and grumpy, and let's not take it to a point where we end up ostracizing folks and making them pull away from the community. Um, have a good one. Get out and game, and I will see you next Sunday. Might even actually post a surprise video somewhere in the week. I used to do that, and I stopped doing those, the roll for surprise videos. Keep an eye out. But anyways, I gotta go. Have fun, folks. Bye.